spines last time. I don't know, but it's great. It's just another reason why I don't need to make sound effects. But if I go back to my first garden, and while I'm saying this, Batavia, think about yours. I can remember.
Okay. I'll think with one part of my brain and listen with the other. I think that's how the brain works. All right,
Is
go
it?
on.
Does it work that way?
I don't know,
I don't know
dude.
either. So for me, it's I remember planting my garden as much as I can remember. The longer and older I get, the less I remember. But I remember planting it, and I remember stepping back and thinking I could put more in, not realizing what the next couple months would bring. And so I went in and I planted more. And then, a month later, I'm watching it and I'm like, oh, yeah, this looks really good. Okay, this looks
Yeah.
great. And the next thing you know, it's like, oh, great. I can't even tell what's a plant and what's not at this point. Um, Now, with all that in mind, I do want to say this: weeds factor into this as well. So they
Here,
take away
here.
from your spacing automatically. What about your first garden? How did you do?
And just to build on that, weeds are, I mean, there's a chance they could choke out your plants, the things you really want to grow. They're stealing nutrients, water. So, in the earlier days, I I had plenty of space in between plants. But that's just not to say that spacing issues are always just planting too close together. Um, it wasn't on my mind. I only had a handful, quite literally a handful of things I was planting, and I was planting in the space where the cage baby lives now. So up against my neighbor's fence. I had a fence at that time. So it was in ground. It wasn't even in a raised bed. And because I had so little to plant, I just naturally spaced it apart. It just seemed logical. But it's interesting because you think about where you started and where you're at now. Mulch wasn't even a thing. Never even thought about it back then. So things were planted, the soil was sitting there drying up every minute. Yeah, but I mean, I grew things. But I could look at, as years kind of passed, the only reason why I started planting things close together initially was because I wanted to grow more things and I
Right.
had the space, so I needed to plant them close together. Then it extended to, all right, create more spaces. It was quite a while, probably, it's probably going on 10 years now before I really became like in tune with the importance of spacing. And I say that not to say I've been working on it 10 years, but just even recognizing like how, planting depth was always easy, but how much space is recommended and then deciding what I was going to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been a road.
I mean, it's the argument to, you know, what's a big garden is one thing, but is it better to have a
Mhm.
big or a small garden? And the argument, first of all, is it a big garden is very subjective.
Yeah.
So there's that, you may think it's a quarter acre. I might think it's 5 acres. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter. Maybe 3 raised beds, it may be 4 pots, whatever. But having a little bit more space does help because invariably what
Yeah.
happens is we're going to learn as we start to grow. And we may have a listener right now that's early in their journey. And it's like, hey, I was very happy with what I had last year, but I want to do more this year. And, the initial thought is like, well, I'll put a little bit more in the bed. But in reality, it's probably better just kind of go out a little bit, have another size garden and start adding more in that way so that you can hone it in because this is something with gardening in general that needs to be tweaked every year. I think it's important to change it and to work through it. And, spacing is a big issue, along with fertilizing and watering and timing and all that other stuff. But it's designed to kind of for us to tweak it, figure it out. If it doesn't work, know the steps that you can do to go back and fix it. So that kind
Yeah.
of leads me into my spacing issues that I had last year.
I have a different take on what you just covered off
Oh,
on,
well, go
but
for it. I want to
yeah,
hear it.
this is the part we didn't get this far in the recording, so he doesn't know that I'm going to come in with something different. I think that you tweak until you get to the point of you being satisfied.
Yeah.
I don't want to think about for the next 40 years that I'm always, and tweaking implies it's something small. I feel like, sure, for something small, I may, tweak it, I may modify just something a bit, but I don't want to be making real changes 10 years from now, 20 years from now, unless something's changed with my circumstance, right? In a
Right.
different garden space, maybe who I'm growing for is different if I've really focused on growing something different. If I'm growing exactly what I plan on growing in this year's garden in 15 years, and I'm not even saying that that's going to be the case, but if it is, I want to have long figured out what that's going to be. I don't want to continue to tinker with it, you know.
Yeah. I
That's
mean,
me and mine. I'm not going to be in a space to recommend what I think you as a gardener should do. But dude, I get tired just thinking about 10 years from now, I'm still gonna be talking about should I grow it in the cage, baby, or should I? Yeah.
well, and I mean, it's for me, I look at it like it's not that big a deal.
Mm,
Um, so last year, this will kind of go into why it's not that big a deal to me.
mm,
Last year, I planted, I liked a monocrop. That's kind of my thing.
mhm,
So I thought. And I went in heavy last year. I mean, I went in all the way. I did a full bed of tomatoes, I did a full bed of peppers, and I did a full bed of corn, and I did a full bed of squash. And some of it worked out great. The squash worked out pretty good. The corn, the peppers, and the tomatoes did not. And so what ended up happening was because the peppers were all the same size, they just kind of overshaded each other in certain aspects.
mhm,
They didn't produce as well. So I was having issues finding the fruits as they were coming up. And so we weren't harvesting as much as we could. And the tomatoes, it was like I would walk up to the bed and it was like I just walked into a wall and I couldn't see anything else. So it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do here? So the tweaking part is just going back to what I had done before, which is companion planting with my peppers and tomatoes. That worked out really good. I had the best pepper and tomato harvest I'd ever had.
mhm.
But in my effort to kind of try and simplify things, I went away from it. I don't know, hindsight's 2020. I just said that out loud. I'm like, why would you change it if it's the best you ever had? But here we are. Um, so it's like you can companion plant for a lot of reasons. You can companion plant for pests, nutrient, you know, one plant will like certain nutrient, one plant won't. You can companion plant for what's coming in the next season in that bed. For me, it's really about the placement of the plant, the size of the plants, and stuff like that. And so I like to keep families together, and I like to keep, you know, the same crop together. But so tomatoes and peppers are in the same family. So there you go. It's a nightshade family. But I'm going to go back to that planting scheme this year and see if that won't correct it. Now, the difficult one is corn.